Hello everybody, this is Evan Codes and welcome to lesson 3 in learning Python. So today we're going to be looking at import statements, getting user input, and introduction into functions. Okay, so let's get started here. The first thing we're going to look at are import statements. So import statements are, essentially what it's going to do is let you use a bunch of different libraries and methods easily in your own code. So the first one we're going to look at here is NumPy, which I think is a great library for Python. So to start an import statement, you simply just say import NumPy as NP. And by saying as NP, we're just going to be able to use shorthand NP dot for any of the upcoming functions. So again, here we are coding in Google Colabs. If you haven't used Google Colabs, just check out the first video in the series and you can see how to get it set up. So to start, we're going to look at just creating an empty array. So in the past, we've created arrays. We can just say A is an empty array, run that, and if we check what A is, you can see that A is empty. But say we want to initialize an array of certain length. Might make it a little bit difficult because we don't want to just keep appending items to this array, say 10 times with all zeros if we wanted to just start out with an array of all zeros. So one of the NumPy functions is actually to initialize an array of zeros. If we get rid of this, we can start by using our NP, which is our NumPy port. And when we click dot, we can see all the different methods that NumPy has inside of it. So there's a lot of math functions, a lot of just manipulation functions, and just other various things. And a lot of the time you can just Google things to find, and they're going to use NumPy. But what we're going to use today is start out with zeros, it's called. And this function takes the shape, type, and order and like, but it won't simply do the shape. So let's do 10. And we're just saying, let's create an empty array of 10 items of all zero. Here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 items, all zeros. So the next import method we're going to look at is the math import class. So we create a new block of code here. We can simply import math. We don't need to say as for this one because math is pretty short. So anytime we want to use something from the math import, we just need to reference the keyword math to get the circumference of a circle. So if we create a variable circ equals, we can say math dot, and again, you see all the different functions that the math has in it. Square root, sine, all these different ones. A useful one is pi. So that's just going to give us the 3.14 variable down to however many decimal places. The circumference of a circle is going to be 2 pi r, so we can just say 2 times pi times whatever radius you want. Let's just do 1. So we can see that's our circumference of a circle with radius of 1. Can do this again if we want to look for the area of the circle. It's going to be pi, so math dot pi times radius, which we can do just as 1. But this is going to need to be squared. So what we can do is actually use math dot pow, and we can use our argument to the power of 2. So radius of 1 to the power of 2. And you can see that the area of a circle with just 1 is pi. So a couple of useful examples from the math import class. Like I said, you can look in here again to see any of the other functions that are in here. Just scroll through. The thing we're going to look at today is getting user input. So you can get user input simply by using the input keyword. So for example, we can say ask the user for a number. So if we want to say nums equals input, and in the input we are going to specify the prompt for the user to enter their input. So essentially we can say please enter a number. If we run this, it's going to have our prompt here, please enter a number, and we can from there enter the number 5, and it's going to save the number 5 into the nums character. So if we check nums, we have 5 in here, but as you can see, this is a string, so it's taken our string of 5 and stored it in here. If we want to specify this as an integer, we can simply just put int in front of it, and that's going to only accept an integer, so we should get an error if we put in a string value. If we try again, we can do 5. It should accept 5, and now in here we see no quotes in here because there is a number. So let's put a few of the things we just learned together. Let's create a little program that is going to get a specific amount of numbers from the user and put it into a list or an array. So first we can use the nums, essentially the same line that we've put up here, which is going to get a integer from the user. Then we can create an empty array of zeros using NumPy. So let's say empty list, we'll call it, equals np dot zeros, and we can use nums in here. So that's going to create a array of zeros of user specified size. Then from there, we can use a for loop to loop through the number of entries and get user input for that. So for I in range nums, we can either append to the list or we can just change the list. So we can say C of I equals input, please enter user input. So let's say again, we'll do 4 numbers, please enter an input, A, and we get C is not defined because I need to be using empty list here, not C. So let's try again, 4 and A could not convert float to string. Yes, so we've created a list of zeros. We cannot assign string values into that numeric value here. We need to again convert our input to an integer. And now we're only allowed to put numbers in here. So we can say 1, 2, 3, 4, print empty list, which is not going to be empty anymore. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another way to do this would be to get rid of this empty list and say change this to C, and what we're going to use is the dot append to the list, and it's not going to equal anymore, it is just going to take input as an argument. Get rid of that. So now this, we're probably going to get an error here because C is not initialized, so we do need to initialize C, but what we can do is just create it as an empty array. And here we go. So let's take 4 user inputs, perfect, and then print out C. There we go. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about today is functions. So functions are really useful in repetitive code and just for code simplification and organization. So what it does is takes a small portion of code and keeps it together, and it's going to be called at various different points in the main section of the code. It's going to allow you to have your portion of code separated for an intended task. So for example, up here, instead of getting user input repeatedly here, we can create a function. So by creating a function, we start with def by defining the function, and we can say get user input, and then define our function in here. So nums equals int. Please enter a number, just like we did before. And then because we're in the function here, we are simply going to return nums. And if we run this, nothing's going to happen. But now up here, we can simply call the function either by just including it in a snippet of code or allocating it to a variable, because we're going to return it as a number. So we can just say a equals get user input, and then print a afterwards. So if we run this, it's jumped into the function here, get user input, prompting us for input, which we'll say 4. And when we enter, it will return number back to a. And as you can see, we've gotten the number 4 back and printed it back. So if we go back up here, we can now get rid of this here and say get user input. And we could create another function here called get string input. And we can just return the input. So now this whole loop can just reference get string input. Boom. So if we run this now, we're going to be calling 2 different functions. First, the get user input. So we need to run the get string input first, so it's remembered in the code. So first we're going to call get user input, which is going to ask for the user for a number. So we'll say 3. Next, we're going to enter user input from this string 3 times. So this can be strings, user input from function. There we go. And if we rerun C, we can see that we have user input from string. So this is a good example of how to use functions with user input and various different import statements. So I hope you enjoyed the lesson today. The next lesson, we're actually going to have enough information in the first 3 to actually create our first application or game. So if you're interested in furthering your Python skills, please check that out and follow along.